Ready to dive into some virtualization. We're going deep on Proxmox virtual environment today.
Always a fun one.
And to do it right, we're going straight to the source, the official Proxmox VE administration guide.
Can't beat that, right?
We'll be breaking down Chapter 2, all about getting Proxmox installed. Should be useful for anyone who, well, needs to install it.
For sure. It's a great resource whether you've been doing this for years or are just getting started with virtualization.
That's what's great about this guide. It really speaks to both newbies and veterans, But even with a great guide, installations can be, well, let's just say it.
Tricky.
Exactly. So by the end of this deep dive, we'll make sure you not only understand the steps, but also have some pro tips to make your Proxmox setup as smooth as possible.
Absolutely. And we're going to make sure you understand not just the what to do, but the why behind it.
Exactly. So you can make the best decisions for your own setups. So every tech project starts with the same thing, the foundation. Hardware.
Of course.
And Proxmox being Proxmox, it gets straight to the point with minimum requirements. Now, these will get you going, but
yeah,
running a full-fledged production environment on those minimum specs would be, well, interesting.
How interesting are we talking?
Let's just say it'd be like running a marathon in flip-flops. Possible, but not pretty.
Right. You might get to the finish line, but
it's not going to be graceful.
Exactly. In the real world, especially for anything business critical, you want to look at those recommended specs. Yeah. That's where Proxmox really highlights the importance of server-grade hardware.
And it makes sense, right? Reliability and performance.
Yeah.
Two things that are, well, kind of important in the server world. And that's what sets server-grade hardware apart.
You got it.
So skimping on the hardware might seem tempting now, but it can definitely come back to bite you later.
100%.
And speaking of crucial components, let's talk memory. RAM.
Yes. The more the merrier. Right?
In general, yes.
Yeah.
But it's easy to think, oh yeah, I've allocated enough RAM. But you have to remember, it's not just about the Proxmox operating system itself.
Right.
Your virtual machines, those are the heart of your virtualized environment, and they need their fair share of RAM too.
It's like, imagine trying to cram all your friends into a tiny car for a road trip.
Oh no, that sounds awful.
Right. Each virtual machine needs its own space to stretch out and run smoothly. And don't forget about storage technologies like Ceph and ZFS. They're amazing for virtualization, but guess what? They need their own chunk of RAM for optimal performance.
So we're talking a decent amount of RAM here. Now what about storage itself? The guide mentions SSDs are important for virtualization. How crucial are they really?
Let me put it this way. In the world of virtualization, fast storage is non-negotiable.
Okay, so it's pretty important.
Think about it. Your virtual machines are basically sharing system resources and storage speed. Well, that directly impacts how efficiently everything runs. A slow hard drive, it's like having a traffic jam every time your virtual machines need to access data. SSDs, though, that's like having a high-speed rail system. Data zips back and forth, no problem.
So SSDs it is.
SSDs are your friend.
Gotcha. All right, so you've got your hardware figured out, SSDs are on the way. What's the next step in our Proxmox adventure?
Time to get a USB stick.
A USB stick. Still need those these days.
For this, absolutely. You can use a CD, sure, but Proxmox actually recommends a USB drive for the installation.
Interesting. Why is that?
Speed. A USB drive is going to be way faster than a CD for getting everything onto your system. And in the tech world, well, time saved is time saved, right?
Makes sense. No one wants to sit around waiting for an installation to finish, that's for sure.
Exactly.
So we've got our USB drive. What do we need to put on it?
The Proxmox ISO image, of course.
Or where do we go for that?
Head over to the Proxmox website. Always good to grab software from the source.
Always a good idea. Now, before we go hitting that download button, the guide does have, let's call it a friendly reminder, about data wiping during the installation.
It does say that, doesn't it?
Something about making sure you're not about to erase something important. Pretty important detail.
Mission critical, I'd say.
Totally. Double check those drives, everyone. Make absolutely sure you're installing Proxmox on the right one. All right, you've got your ISO, you've double checked your drives. Time to choose your installation method. Options, options, options.
Right. Proxmox gives you a few graphical, terminal, even debug mode.
Debug mode, is that for like the really adventurous types?
Or the really desperate. Let's stick with the first two for now, though. So how do you choose? It's a bit like picking between a scenic route and a highway, isn't it?
I see what you mean.
For most users, the graphical installer is going to be the way to go. It's straightforward, walks you through the process step by step. But, and this is important, if you're working with very new hardware, or even very old hardware, the terminal-based installer might be a better choice. Sometimes it can just get around those quirky compatibility issues that can trip up the graphical installer.
Good to know. It's like having a backup plan.
Exactly.
Now, I noticed the guide also mentions this thing called no-mo set. Should we be worried about that?
Not at all, don't worry.
That's good.
Think of no mod set as a little magic phrase you can use if, and hopefully it doesn't happen, but if you run into any graphics driver issues during the installation,
Okay.
it basically just tells the installer, hey, let's use a more basic graphics mode just to play it safe.
Gotcha. Like using safe mode on a computer, just in case.
Exactly. Okay, you've booted up the installer, everything's looking good so far, and then you hit the section on ZFS and LVM.
Ah, yes. This is where things can get a little, let's say, intimidating.
For some people, sure, but it's really not as complicated as it might seem at first glance.
That's good, because at first glance, it's a bit much.
Basically, both ZFS and LVM are about one thing: managing your storage space. Think of them as the organizers of your Proxmox world.
Okay, I like that.
They help you really divide up your storage needs, make the most of what you've got.
So instead of just having one big empty space, we're being strategic about it.
Exactly. So let's start with LVM. Logical volume management. Imagine you're building a house, right?
I like where this is going.
You wouldn't just have one big empty room, would you? You'd want separate rooms for different purposes, right?
Of course.
That's LVM. It lets you create these things called volume groups. Those are your main storage containers, like the foundation of your house. And then within those volume groups, you create logical volumes.
Which are like?
The individual rooms, the partitions.
Gotcha. So that's LVM. What about ZFS? How is that different?
ZFS is really known for being very robust and having these advanced features. One of the big ones, software RAID.
We hear that term a lot, but in simple terms, what is RAID?
It's basically taking multiple physical disks and combining them into one big storage pool. Not only do you get more space that way, but it also provides something called fault tolerance.
Fault tolerance. That sounds important.
It is. Think of it this way. What happens if one of your hard drives decides to give up?
Not good.
Right. But with ZFS, because your data is mirrored across multiple disks, if one fails, no problem. Just replace it, rebuild the storage pool, and you're good to go.
That is a huge relief, I've got to say.
It's a lifesaver.
Yeah.
And that's not all. ZFS has this other great feature called snapshots.
Snapshot, like taking a picture.
Kind of. Imagine being able to take a snapshot of your entire system, like a point in time, and if something goes wrong, you can just revert back to that snapshot in no time.
So it's like a time machine for your virtual machines.
Exactly. And it can be a huge time saver, especially if you're making a lot of changes or testing things out.
ZFS sounds pretty amazing. Are there any downsides? There's always a catch, right?
Well, a couple of things to keep in mind. The guide mentions that ZFS and hardware RAID controllers, they don't really get along.
So it's one or the other.
Pretty much. And remember how we were talking about RAM being important?
Yeah.
ZFS really likes RAM. It needs a decent amount to really perform well.
How much are we talking here?
A good rule of thumb is to aim for at least 1 gigabyte of RAM for every terabyte of storage you're going to use with ZFS. Trust me, your ZFS setup will thank you for it.
Okay, so if we go the ZFS route, make sure we've got plenty of RAM.
Lots of RAM.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's say we've made it this far. We've gone through the installation, we've chosen our storage setup, and we're staring at our freshly installed Proxmox system. What's next? Can we start spinning up some virtual machines yet?
Almost, but not quite. There are a few essential post-installation steps we need to take care of. First things first, remember that IP address you noted down earlier?
I think I have it somewhere.
Well, find it, because that is your key to accessing the Proxmox web interface.
So it's all web-based management from here on out.
Pretty much.
That is convenient.
It is nice. But before you get too comfortable, a few things to double check. Make sure your IP configuration is correct, your host name is set the way you want it, and your time zone is accurate.
Time zone, that's an important one.
It is. These might seem like minor details, but getting them right from the start can save you some serious headaches down the road.
Like trying to figure out why all your scheduled tasks are running at the wrong time.
Exactly. And speaking of getting things in order, next up is firewall configuration.
The virtual bouncer at the door.
Exactly. Think of it as building a nice, sturdy fence around your Proxmox environment, just to keep those unwanted virtual visitors out.
Security first.
Always.
Any other post-installation tips we should be aware of? Give us the good stuff.
Well, since we were just talking about ZFS and performance, there's a really handy tip in the guide for getting that extra edge out of your ZFS setup, and that is the ZFS intent log, or ZIL for short.
ZIL. Sounds intense. Tell me more.
It's all about speed. The ZIL basically acts like a dedicated express lane for all those write operations that your system has to handle.
Okay.
It's a small, very fast storage device, ideally an SSD, that ZFS can use to temporarily store those write requests. And then once they're ready, it commits them to the main storage pool.
So it's like adding a turbocharger to our already powerful ZFS engine.
That's a great way to put it. By using a ZIL, you can really cut down on write latency, which basically means your system can handle those write operations way faster.
Okay, so I'm sold on this whole ZIL idea. It's like giving your ZFS setup a performance boost. Now you've got me curious. What other performance gems are hidden away in this Proxmox guide? So we've covered a lot here, everything from picking the right hardware, how to actually install Proxmox, configuring storage with LVM or the mighty ZFS, even squeezing out extra performance with the ZIL. I'm ready to build a virtual machine empire at this point. Are we missing anything, or can we get to it?
Almost there. There's just one more thing tucked away in the guide, and it's a big one, especially for those larger deployments out there. Unattended installation.
Unattended, like set it and forget it kind of thing.
Basically, imagine being able to deploy Proxmox on, say, a whole rack of servers without having to manually go through the entire installation process on each one. That's the power of unattended installation.
Okay, that sounds pretty amazing, especially if you've got a lot of systems to set up. How does it even work?
You basically create a script, or an answer file, as the guide calls it. This file has all your preferred settings, and then, well, the installer pretty much takes it from there.
That's pretty slick. So I'm guessing this is getting into some more, well, advanced territory.
A little bit, yeah. The guide goes into using this answer file and configuring specific rules, things like that. Maybe a topic for a deep dive of its own sometime.
Definitely. We'll put that on the list. But for now, let's do a quick recap of what we've learned today. We started with the hardware, choosing the right components. Then we talked about different installation methods. After that, it was all about storage. LVM versus ZFS, and of course, how to make ZFS even faster with the ZIL.
And the best part is, we're just scratching the surface. Remember, all this is just from Chapter 2 of the Proxmox VE Administration Guide. There are entire chapters dedicated to things like networking, storage management, and of course, diving deep into the world of virtual machines themselves.
So really, this deep dive was just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Proxmox.
Oh.
But hey, we've given you the knowledge you need to confidently install Proxmox, and now it's up to you to take it from here, right?
Yeah.
Build that dream virtualized environment, home server powerhouse, a full-blown testing lab. It's all possible.
Exactly. The possibilities are really endless with Proxmox. It's such a flexible and powerful platform.
That's the beauty of it. It can adapt to pretty much any need. So our advice, grab a copy of the Proxmox VE Administration Guide, explore those other chapters we talked about, and see what you can create with the power of virtualization at your fingertips. And hey, we'll be here for those future deep dives too. Until then, happy virtualizing, everyone.